Okay, are we on? We got sound? John, you can hear me okay? Okay, got thumbs up. So, sorry I couldn't be here last week, so there's no Sunday school. No, just kidding. I wish I could have been here last week though, and I'm rejoice with those who were part of that baptismal service. Sounds like it was a very nice, very God-honoring time, and appreciate the way Pastor structured it. Challenge to the candidates, your challenge to the congregation. Thought that was all very good. I was in Morris again. It was an accident. I just drove right out of my driveway instead of left. No, they are still looking for a pastor. The person who's head of pulpit supply had people all lined up for August for the whole month, and then someone dropped out at the last minute, so he asked if I could fill in last week. Obviously they have, well not obviously, but they have someone this Sunday, and then and next Sunday as well. So we're still in talks with some people up there as to their longer term plans for that. So you can continue to pray for that. And we crossed another hurdle on selling our house this last week. So the only contingency left is that we find a place, and we haven't done that yet. But you'll be the first to know, because we'll need help moving. And
You missed the last part. What was that last part? I'll pray for you.
Be warmed and filled. And nobody said anything about these book boxes or pianos, but we just one. The thing down here in Marshall is we're trying to get away from stairs. I don't know if you can sympathize with that. And most of the houses are split levels, or they cost twice as much as what we could afford. So my wife saw one really nice house, and she said, well, can we just buy half of it? And we'll even live in half of it. It's just, that's kind of been what's been on the market. So we're still waiting on the Lord for that. But you can certainly pray with us. Our seller, or no, we're the sellers. Our buyer did say they would flex with us and extend the purchase agreement for another 60 days. So we don't have to be out, next week or anything. But yeah, we'll have a couple months yet. It's the waiting part, right? That we have to do. All right, so Sunday school. We are somehow still in the midst of our series on Christian worldview, and we're in the second section on the fear of the Lord. And I still need to make this font bigger. So I mentioned at the beginning that there is, and since we haven't met for a couple of weeks, I'll just review this quickly, kind of 5 conversations around Christian worldview. I think that's probably a good way of putting it. We talked about definitions, and we are now talking about the fear of the Lord, and the book of Proverbs is our basis for this. And then there are 3 others that we'll get to. We will probably, maybe, finish the fear of the Lord next Sunday. We'll see how today goes and how next week goes. But we should be able to finish that up. And then we'll go into the other ones, knowing God, world order, and imagination. So by looking at our definitions, one of the things that we talked about is when we're talking about Christian worldview, we're trying to ask the question, well, what are we talking about when we talk about Christian worldview? And this is the most recent definition of worldview in general, and with Christian as adjective, we're asking the question, well, how should Christians view the world? Worldview in general, all the beliefs that one has that affects how one lives in the perceived world, including, we'll adjust this definition as we go through, but it's worldview is everything that we bring to the world around us, and that allows us to live in the world. And I brought, some examples that when you go to Hy-Vee, you have a belief that the person, the cashier, isn't going to do you harm when you walk up to the counter, right? That's just something you bring with you. It's part of life. I had an interesting conversation. I was telling my wife this story on our way down. We have a faculty member who will stop and chat with you in the hallway, but when she does all the chatting at like 120 words per minute, and then she's like, "Oh, gotta go, nice talking with you," and she's gone. And you're like, "Bye," and you really can't get a word in edgewise. But she was telling me, well, we went out to South Dakota. She goes, my sisters and I, we go out there, we rent four-wheelers, and she's a little bit older, so this isn't rowdy four-wheel. I mean, I can imagine if we all took like a class trip to go four-wheeling, what it would be like. Okay, so that's kind of what she's talking about. And so she's like, oh, but it was Sturgis weekend, and of course she talks really fast. It was Sturgis weekend, and there were motorcycles everywhere, even the little towns around Sturgis. You go into a town, and it's just motorcycle after motorcycle after motorcycle. And she goes, my sister lives out there, and she said that all these motorcycle people, they're not allowed to wear their jackets into the bars so that they don't have gang fights break out in the bars. So if you walk in with a jacket on into the bar or a restaurant, they'll tell you to leave. She goes, and then my sister told me, and Debbie, every one of them's packing. She goes, can you imagine that? No. Can't imagine that. And so she was telling me a lot about her worldview and how she had a little bit of culture shock with the worldview of the biker community who was out in Sturgis that weekend. All right, so these are all the things, and we may not even be always aware of all the things that affect the way we think about the world. And so this is a lot of it's the way we're raised, where we're raised, all of those things. I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, last week maybe, and it was about a young guy who had grown up in Milwaukee in a fundamental Baptist church, small Christian school. He went into the military, and he had some interesting experiences in the military, but he decided while he was in the military that he wanted to get into humanitarian aid. And where he's at right now is in Thailand, working with the Burmese people in the refugee camps. And he's working on the Burma side of the border with Thailand, trying to get Burmese people who are the Karen people who are fleeing for their lives, being persecuted, trying to get them to safety. And that's what he's doing now. And he was talking about his first trip up there and how things were imagining, which we can't right? We can't imagine. Your entire life, you're born in a refugee camp. You live your whole life in a refugee camp. And for most of them, they have no hope of getting out. Now, does this sound familiar? We had someone here about a month or so ago tell us about this. And so this was a guy who was over there trying to work with them. So anyway, it was an interesting connection. But that frame of mind, this is where you grow up. You don't know anything else. You don't know life as anything different. All of this affects our worldview. When we when we put the word Christian in front of that, what we're asking is, well, how should a Christian view the world around them? And what should that look like? And that will not look exactly the same for everyone, because it is different in different cultures and in different languages and different people, and that's okay. But this is the question we're asking. How should we as Christians view the world? So that was what we talked about in definitions. Now we started talking about these questions in Proverbs, and I asked you to read the book of Proverbs. Did anyone read it again in the last 2 weeks? Did anyone have a chance to read it again? You're just laughing at me? Like that was...
I wasn't in class to hear that request.
Yeah. So the goal of the Proverbs discussion is to try to just refresh your memory of the book of Proverbs by reading it as quickly as you can and asking ourselves some questions about what we've read. So one of the questions is who is doing the teaching? We talked about that a little bit last time. Today what I would like to talk about a little bit more is the second question, who is being taught? And then maybe next week we can talk about the next two questions. What is being taught and how is it being communicated? So this revolves around this question of worldview, Christian worldview, because we're assuming the book of Proverbs is at least a biblical worldview, we could say, that this God is teaching us through the book of Proverbs how we should be thinking about the world. Okay, so who is teaching? These are some of the ones that we mentioned 2 weeks ago. Solomon, mothers, fathers, wisdom personified. The wise person is also doing some teaching, and we could extrapolate a little bit more on that if we wanted to. But I want to focus today on who is being taught. So here's a list that I made just from the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs. And you might remember the first 9 books are actually the Proverbs of Solomon. They're a unit. They're a literary unit designed to be read together. Okay, and then chapter 10 starts with the sayings of Solomon. So the more shorter one-verse type Proverbs that we usually think of. Of Solomon starts in chapter 10. And there are other contributors to the book of Proverbs than Solomon. But he was considered the wisest man in the world, and so at the time. And so that's why we start with him. So reading through the first 9 chapters, here are a few that I pulled out that are mentioned. The simple, the youth, which is technically the young man, but I think it's probably, we could apply it to young men. And I won't even say no offense, Joseph, but we could apply it to young men, but it probably applies to young women too. The youth, so the modern translations just call it youth. The wise are someone who's being taught. The one who has understanding is being taught. The fool is being taught. The sinner is being taught. Scoffers are being taught. And there's probably some others who are being taught in the book that show up there. But those are kind of the main ones. So if you go through, you're welcome to do this between now and next week. So we had one faculty member at the seminary used to say the A student would go home this week and read through the book of Proverbs and ask themselves this question, who's being taught? And just make a list. But in our lives, we've probably read the book of Proverbs enough. We've had an awful lot of Bible teaching. We've had experience in life that we could probably talk about these, and this is what I would like to do today, is kind of talk about these categories. But when you think of, let's start with the youth. When you think of the youth as a category of people, how do you describe them? What would you say about them? Thinking about the book of Proverbs, but also thinking about your own experience.
Anyone younger than me?
Okay. Anyone younger than the Goblerses are the youth.
Includes you too, Paul.
Includes Paul. Pastor.
People kind of in that transition from children to adult, there's a period of time when they're like learning their own authority, or I don't know how to say it. They're transitioning from being under the authority of their parents to being responsible for themselves. I think youth would be the group of people who are making that transition.
Okay, so Pastor said that the youth might be the people who are making that transition from being under the authority of their parents to making those responsible decisions on their own. Now, as a parent of 2 children, this was a regular conversation with our daughters as they grew up, because you would have tension, right? This is where we have tension between the parents and the children. We want you to make your own decisions. We want you to grow up and make your own decisions. And then what happens? You make your own decision. Why'd you do that? That was stupid, right? That wasn't a good decision. Why didn't you ask us first? Well, you told me to go make my own decision, so I did. You know, we had this happen to my family, and it's not likely my family's going to see this recording, so I'll use them. But my brother is he's 6 years older than I am, and so when I was a kid, we had just moved to the cities. My brother was out of high school. He would have been 2 years out of high school, and a year or two. He had moved out. He'd rented an apartment, and my dad kept, you've got to buy a car. You got to buy your own car. You got to have your own car. You know, you got to be able to take yourself to work. You got to be able to, you know, you've got a job, save up your money. You've got an apartment now, buy a car so you can get to and from work. So my brother buys himself a car. And he drives it to our apartment. We were living in an apartment at the time. And he's all excited, right? He's 19, 20 years old. He's all excited because he went and he bought himself his first car. And I'll never forget, because he pulls it up, he parks it outside on the street. And so what does everybody do? We go all running out the front door. And he has bought himself a little Fiero sports car, red, 2-door, no trunk. If you know these little Fieros, you're sitting on the ground. And he's all excited. He has his first car. We walk out there, and my dad immediately blows up. You know, what are you doing in a red sports car? How much did you spend for that? Is it any good? I mean, is there oil pouring out the bottom? Like, you know, you're going to get a ticket every time you drive across town. And you know, it guzzles gas. This isn't practical, right? So my dad just lays into it. And so, of course, what does my brother do? He just leaves. And so you have this tension between the two, and so we try to do that with our kids. You know, we try to get them to make wise decisions. We want them to grow. We want them to fledge. But then we also have to, you know, we want to keep the relationship. So as they're making those decisions, hopefully we're not telling them so much what to do, right, but advising them along the path of how to do that. And so when we think of the youth, yeah, I think we find that often in Proverbs, there's a little bit of naivete, right? There's a little bit of lack of world experience living in the world when we think about the youth. And so they need to be taught. What do you think about the simple? Who is the simple? And don't look at the person next to you.
We're all looking at you.
I walked into that one.
Somebody who just mentally is maybe below their age level. You know, somebody, I don't think it's wrong to be simple. It's just somebody who just is not a complicated thinker.
Okay, so maybe simple isn't necessarily a negative term. Like we have a couple up there, right? The fool, the sinner, the scoffer, the scorner, which we all usually think of as kind of more of the negative side of things. Simple is kind of, well, you said below there. I mean,
lacking, how would you even say it?
Well, maybe they don't think things through.
Or they can't.
Or they can't.
Have
Impulsive.
the ability,
Or maybe they just haven't thought of it.
or maybe they're in like, you know, special ed or something.
well, okay. So that brings up a couple points.
What's politically correct to say?
Doug's gonna help you out.
Well, I think you got it in both order. You got the simple, the youth, and the wise.
That's in the wrong order?
No, that's right.
Oh, that's the right order. So the simple, yeah, so maybe what you're looking for is, you said they were lacking something. And you thought maybe the ability to do something.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are they lacking? Randy?
Education. I kind of
Yeah.
think of myself as simple, kind of common sense for the most part.
Well, that's more like wise. I mean, that's sort of what's all been shooting for with wise is just common sense guided by the Bible, guided by revelation. I mean, that's wisdom.
Right.
A lot in Proverbs.
Wouldn't simple just be childlike, trusting, innocent?
Okay, so childlike perhaps or innocent, and maybe that's what Doug was after, kind of the younger than youth, less experience. I think Proverbs describes someone can be older. Randy, you could be simple if you wanted. That's fine. I think well, obviously it's not fine, but that's okay. They're lacking discernment, or they're lacking the ability to discern. So someone who's simple doesn't get the joke, right? Because either they don't have the information that lets them know that they are the joke, or they just don't think about it, right? They don't have that ability to discern, or maybe they just don't have the discernment. Now, there's an interesting verse in Proverbs, and I didn't look it up. I should have. Bad teacher. But in the Old King James anyway, it says, "Smite the scorner, and the simple will be wise." The pastor's going to try to find it for me. Smite the scorner, and the simple will be wise. How is it that smiting the scorner instructs the simple? How does that work?
They see, and they're like, oh, I don't want that to happen to me.
Okay, so it is like, oh, I don't want that to happen, right? That's a good point. So you learn from someone else's mistake. I used to say that in my family. My sister would get in trouble, and then I would be like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to get in trouble. That's how it happened. Joseph?
Well, couldn't we maybe find a synonym for the simple, maybe if we take away this definition, maybe students, those who are there to be taught now?
Mm-hmm. So those who are there to be taught? Well, the issue is, though, that sometimes the simple they don't take an active participation in their education, right? So sometimes the simple is, their attention is grabbed, well, so to speak, when something happens around them, and then they say, oh, there's something here maybe I need to know. Did you find that verse?
1925.
So Proverbs 19:25. Yeah. Oh, okay. Strike the scoffer, and the simple will learn prudence. Reprove a man of understanding, and he will gain knowledge. So there's a lot that could be said about that verse. So strike the scoffer in the ESV. And the simple is going to learn prudence, or gain that understanding of the situation. Prudence, the right understanding of the situation. But you'll notice, reprove a man of understanding, the one who has understanding, it's one of our categories, and he will gain knowledge. So if you take someone who has understanding and you correct him, he will be thankful that you corrected him. So sometimes we're switching categories to the one who has understanding here because of this verse. But you ever feel like you need to correct someone and you're nervous about how it's going to go? Like, it's not going to turn out well? So in the business world, this happens all the time. I had a coworker, not at the university, but I had a coworker one time, and I had had these experiences before in the past where you don't even know it, but you rub a coworker the wrong way, and then they just stop talking to you, right? Or they just stop acknowledging your existence, basically. And you go to them and you're like, what happened? And they may, I don't even want to talk about it. Well, you did this. So I had a situation where I was training in a new coworker, and on like day 2, I said, look, I'm not perfect. If I ever say or do something that offends you, would you just come to me? I will appreciate that. I won't appreciate it if you just stop talking to me. And it's a long story, I won't get into all the details, but there was a misunderstanding. There was another coworker who had misunderstood something that I was doing. I was actually confronting another coworker, trying to correct him. This coworker overheard our conversation and didn't understand the context of it and thought I wasn't correcting him, thought I was telling him to do something that was malicious. Went to the person who had received the malice and said it was Eric all along who was behind it. So this goes on for like a year, because all of a sudden, person shuts up, doesn't talk to me, doesn't acknowledge my existence, obviously cold shoulder. That person ends up going away, and we meet up a year later at a conference up in Brainerd, and it was me, the person who misunderstood my conversation with somebody else, the coworker who wouldn't talk to me anymore. We were sitting around a campfire with a bunch of other people, and this conversation comes up. She brings it up. I was so angry with you for what you did to me. What did I do to you? Well, I knew everything by this time, and knew that it was a misunderstanding. And so the guy sitting next to me says, wait, you didn't say that? You didn't tell him to do that? I said, no, never did. And so then he knew that I knew that he said something about me to her that wasn't true, and it all came around. Talk to a person who has understanding. We should be like that. We should be people of understanding. If someone comes to us and says, hey, can I talk to you about something that I think is not right, or you did that wasn't right, or something I perceive to be, can you explain to me the situation, because I'm not sure, but this is what it looks like. We should welcome people to come into our lives and do that to us, assuming that they know how to do that well. Because we want to be the person of understanding. We want to say, hey, if there's something I need to fix here, come talk to me, and I'm happy to fix that. I'm not going to get mad, I'm not going to respond, I'm not going to get angry, I'm not going to yell, I'm going to be grateful, I'm going to be thankful. So that's the kind of people we want to be. The wise also are those who are being taught, which goes along with that. How do you know, I think this is an interesting question, how do you know if somebody is wise?
If they don't talk.
All right? You know if someone is wise if they don't talk. At least, even a fool, I was saying, I'm pretty sure there's a proverb that says, even a fool seems wise, and this is my paraphrase, when he keeps his mouth shut. The real fool opens his mouth, and then we all know. A wise person doesn't always have the need to talk. I don't know what that says about me again.
Kind of kills the discussion, doesn't it?
I see what you did there. Very clever. How do we know if somebody is wise?
They observe and make a lot of good decisions, and I think that comes from observance.
Okay, so you observe the decisions that they're making, and you say that from all external appearances, they seem to be wise decisions. Okay, so that wisdom is something that we exercise.
They don't get angry easily.
They are what?
They don't get angry easily.
Okay, a wise person does not get angry easily.
A wise person is aware of their limitations. They're always looking for more wisdom.
Okay.
They don't think they've arrived. So there's humility there too.
A wise person has humility because they know that there are places where they lack wisdom. Socrates, of course, Socrates is a little, he comes after Solomon, but Socrates states that something along the effect of, this man and I are both fools. But he's a fool because he thinks he's wise and he's not. And I'm a fool because I know I'm not wise. And so this difference between knowing that I have room to improve in wisdom versus someone who thinks that they know everything. Again, when our daughters were little, we didn't want them to respond to something, I know. Well, if I'm teaching you something, you obviously don't know. I know, Dad. I know how to do that. Okay, well, obviously you don't. Otherwise, I wouldn't be saying anything. So I would just tell them that's not an acceptable answer. Okay. Oh, I know. Know that. So you look at people's decisions that they make. You look at the way they consider even the matter of wisdom or learning, the humility that goes along with that. We talk about this sometimes a little bit with pastors, and we won't talk about, pastor in particular. We'll keep it generic. But when you're looking for a pastor, one of the things that as a qualification for a pastor is that they're supposed to be spiritually mature. So if you are, hypothetically speaking, if you are spiritually immature, then how do you identify someone who is spiritually mature? You don't. It takes someone who has spiritual maturity to be able to discern whether somebody else is spiritually mature. It takes someone who has wisdom to be able to discern, is the person I'm talking to at this moment, are they being simple? Are they being wise? Are they being a fool? Are they being a scoffer? How exactly are they responding to the teaching that is being given to them at this point in time? And those of us who are older have probably had experiences where we're trying to instruct someone in something and aren't making it through. And it's usually because that person feels like they haven't they know, or they understand, or they don't have room for growth. And this can even annoy some people. I have